Welcome to the Contemporary World Issues recording for week 4, and you can see that week 4 is the second half of the Democracy and Government in America unit. So on Monday and Tuesday you'll be doing America's Social Contract, Section C. Then on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday you'll do the political party system in America. That's Section D, and then that will wrap up that unit. So this unit is right down here, the second unit, Democracy and Government in Modern America. So you can see some of the things you'll do. The first thing I want to note, of course, we're skipping the discussions. I'm including the discussions in the Class Connect write-ups. So we're changing that up a little bit. We've done it all along. So you'll go through the whole unit, of course. There's a little crossword puzzle activity you'll do. You're watching this recording now, then you'll do the Class Connect write-up. So you'll turn that in. Then on Tuesday, the tutorial on individual rights, Martin Luther King information, a project about starting a revolution in Seattle, and then the social contract quiz. And of course, before you do the quizzes, you always make sure you look at the quiz previews. So I have the Section C. There's no quiz. Let's see, America's Social Contract quiz. I don't see it in here, so I don't think you have a quiz for America's Social Contract. You don't have a quiz for Section C because you have an activity. So, anyway, so this recording is just going to be Section C, then I'll do a separate recording for Section D. So taking a look, Democracy and Government in Modern America, into Section C. When we talk about Section C, the first thing it talks about is what's called America's Social Contract. And you know what social is? Social is people interacting with one another. And then obviously contract would be an agreement. So essentially there's this social contract that's kind of unwritten, and it's agreement between that kind of delineates the way that people act with one another in a civilized society. So that's what this is all going to be about, because that's how governments operate effectively, is by people living under these social contracts. So before we do this, of course, we want to go to the Class Connect write-up. So go to the Section C Class Connect write-up. And you can see on page 1, what is a social contract? So let's go back here. And a social contract, so we go down here. And it talks about Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence. So you can listen to this, play the Declaration of Independence, somebody reading the Declaration of Independence, where it talks about social contracts. And then how Thomas Jefferson and the Founding Fathers, they wanted to have people, the citizens of the United States to be responsible for their own government, but they also wanted people to be treated fairly. So that's where social contract comes in. So the people's willingness to subject themselves to be governed to maintain order is called a social contract. So what that means is that it assumes that people will make decisions that reflect the general cooperation of the community, and they understand that they will be held liable for offenses that contradict that cooperative. So really what it means is people will do things the right way. It's actually like the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's sort of like that. But essentially, social contract is the people's willingness to subject themselves to be governed to maintain order. That's what a social contract is. Now in this unit, we're going to evaluate the effectiveness of federalism in promoting the common good and protecting individual rights, examine the issues of balancing the common good with individual rights, identify key constitutional statements about protection of the common good and individual rights, examine court cases that test the Bill of Rights, and look at philosophical thought underlying the Constitution. Now think about this, when we talk about common good, that means things that are good for everybody in general, for the whole population or for your community. But then there's individual rights. These things conflict. So one example of how they would be conflicting is, let's say that a new grocery store wanted, or a new factory wanted to move to your town, and it was going to employ 140 people or something like that. So it's going to be a real economic advantage. But the only available property in town is owned by a family, and they don't want to sell it. Well, it's their individual right to have that property. However, them not selling that to the community or to the company to build this new factory is not for the common good. So governments can actually go in and they can buy your land from you. They can force you to sell your land. So that's an example of an individual right and a common good where they sort of conflict. Okay, moving along on to page 3. So page 3 talks about social contract in schools, and the idea here is that in school settings, that you don't sign anything that says I'm going to behave, I'm going to do the right things and all that in school. But kids go to school, and the students generally conduct themselves in a certain way academically and socially to ensure that the school population is successful and there's an educational atmosphere there. So we don't sign a contract. We're not told what we have to do. We just know that because we're American citizens, we know what is expected of us in an educational environment or in any type of environment. Heck, when you go to a movie, when you go to the theater to watch the latest, like the new James Bond movie that's coming out or something, you don't sign a contract saying, I will not be loud, I will not throw popcorn on people, I will not pour Cokes on people or things like that. But you do it because that's the social contract. That's the agreement that we all have, the unwritten agreement, that we will behave properly and not interfere with somebody else's business. So that's really what social contract means. Now this is a little warm-up activity talking about looking at a school's mission statement and talking about some of the rights in the mission statement, but you don't need to worry about that, but you can read this mission statement from this school. And if everybody abides by what these say, then the school's going to be a good community. Okay, moving on to page 4. And I know there's a class-connected write-up question for page 4, and it says, for a society to be efficient and healthy, what do individuals have to do? That should be the word do, so I'll fix that. For a society to be efficient and healthy, what do individuals have to do? Well, let's look here. Social contracts started out a long time ago, hundreds of years ago, when Thomas Hobbes came up with social contract. And it was all developed in early days in European society, in English society, and other societies. So they came up with all of these. And in order for a society to be efficient and healthy, individual citizens must forego some selfish comforts to ensure a common good. Excuse me. Meaning that people must give up certain things so that everybody benefits. So that would mean that, like in your town, that means if you have maybe your dad drives an 18-wheeler semi-truck. Well, he has every right to park it in front of his house where the trailer stretches out to the 2 houses next to him and takes up all those parking places. But he doesn't do that because that's not for the common good. So these are some of the things that we need to do. So that answers the question. So individual citizens, they have to forego, which means we give up some selfish comforts or give up some rights, sort of, to ensure the common good. As for a society to be efficient and healthy. That's what this talks about, is that for most individuals, if they have a rational self-interest, meaning that they reasonably do things for themselves and aren't too selfish, then they give up the freedoms so that the state and the political order will be kept. So, if I live in an apartment, I have all rights to blast my music as loud as I want to. Or I could holler and scream if I want to call that freedom of speech, but I don't do it because that's not the benefit of other people. So you can read through this, find out more about that, how people in societies cooperate, and it's all because of this thing called the common good, which has to do with people's rights. So it's really the principles of morality and the common good that give us a peaceable and successful society. And here's some social contract thing. You might think of some social contracts you witness today. Here's a social contract. When you're walking out of a door and somebody else is coming in the same doorway, most of us will hold it open for the other person. That's a social contract. Most of us don't burp in the middle of in public society. That's a social contract. Most of us don't do other bodily functions in front of society. That's a social contract. So you can think about 10 things that are social contracts. Okay, page 5. And let's see if we have a Class Connect write-up question. No, I don't. So page 5 talks about the government and social contract. And Thomas Jefferson, he referred to the people when he was writing the Declaration of Independence as being in a natural state, and that they had a separate place in society, and God entitled them to that place. The Declaration of Independence was written with kind of a religious background to it. But then Thomas Jefferson also had the social contract philosophy, belief that all men are entitled to choose a government they feel represents the freedom that they want to protect. So you can see that all this stuff about social contract and everything goes back an awful long way and has to deal with how people behave in a society. And the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes, he also talked about people and how they live within their society and how they have some rights, but how they also have to give up other rights to live in a civil society. And finally, John Locke, also in England at the same time as Thomas Hobbes, you can read what his beliefs are. That the state of nature would come together to form a state. So if everybody acted morally and for the common good, then that would automatically create a good society. So that's what a lot of these people thought. And finally, the last thing, for a government to have rights, they get those rights because they are given to the government by the people that the government governs. So again, that's a democracy, a representative democracy. We give our government rights, and in turn they govern us the way that we want to be governed. Okay, page 6. Page 6 is a crossword puzzle activity, so make sure you do these interactives to reinforce what you've learned. Page 7, I know we have a Class Connect write-up question. So page 7, what are the 4 main individual freedoms promised in the First Amendment? I bet you know those now without me saying it, because we covered it last unit, I think. So looking at this, so the First Amendment to the Constitution, first thing that Thomas Jefferson started thinking about, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, meaning free exercise of religion, abridge the freedom of speech or the press, or the right for people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So the Class Connect write-up question was about what are the 4 individual rights. So you can read down through here. It talks about really the freedom of religion, speech, press, and assembly. Those are essentially the 4 individual rights given by the First Amendment to the Constitution. So we're free to have whatever religion we want as long as it doesn't interfere with other people. Freedom of speech. I can go out in the street and I can give a speech if I want, or I can hold up a political sign. That's freedom of speech. I can do whatever I want as long as I don't break a noise ordinance law or something like that. Freedom of the press. Newspapers can practically print anything they want, although obviously there are some laws against slander and those types of things. And finally, assembly. We can assemble peaceably. So those are the 4 individual main freedoms. Of course, you can see down here, freedom of the press and freedom of the speech. They cannot be slanderous, or they can't assault people, so meaning they can't be bad things, essentially. So further along, this starts talking about, in the 1960s, getting into the civil rights movement and anti-war movements in the 70s. And these movements really showed the freedom of speech and the freedom of assembly that we all have, that our government gives us. And a lot of these were called civil disobedience. However, even though it was civil, meaning peaceable, peaceful, people still were killed in some of these civil assemblages, whether they were killed by police or other protesters who are against them, whatever it happens to be. So just because things happen civilly doesn't mean that they end up civilly. So you can read all of this, about how people can assemble and the rights that we all have because of the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson, for the most part, wrote. Now the last thing down here at the bottom, Johnson versus Texas permitted the American citizens to burn the flag as a freedom of speech. So American citizens, we can burn our flags if we wanted to. Now some people want to put constitution amendments against burning the flag, but that's really, that's the way that you can argue against your government, and you have the right to argue against your government. But whether burning the flag is the best way to do that, I don't know. But it is, you cannot go to jail for burning a flag unless it's not your flag, unless you've stolen it or something. Okay, moving on to page 8 and a class connect write-up question. Let's see. So we did this on the 7, those 4 main. Okay, number 8. In what instance can the government intrude on our First Amendment rights? And that's on page 8, slide 2. So if we go to page 8, this is a tutorial which is like a speech. So when you go through it, it has like 6 or 7 slides. You can watch the slides as these two people that are debating some individual rights and common good. So watch that. But you can also go down here at the bottom and get the copy of the script. So if you look at the script, there's slide 1, there's slide 2, then slide 3 is way down here, slide 4, etc. So you can read that script, and right here in slide 2 is the one question that I had. And it was, when can the government intrude, or something like that. Let me go back to that question. What did it say? In what instance can the government intrude on our First Amendment rights? In what instance? The common good outweighs privacy rights, and government intrusion into emails, financial records is warranted when you are a terrorist suspect. So that's when the government can do it. So that's really specific. But if we move down here, it says the right to life, liberty, property is the foundation of our country, but when a person's individual rights step on the rights of another, our government can protect us, can intrude on those rights. So that means that, the time when the government can intrude on a person's rights is when that person's rights are stepping on the rights of another person. Again, you have the right to do practically whatever you want as long as it does not impede or intrude on the rights of others. So that's when the government can step in, is when what we're doing, rightfully doing, interferes with someone else's rights. That is not legal, and the government will step in, police will step in, whatever it happens to be. So that answers that class connect write-up question. But make sure you go through this whole document, and you can, what I would recommend is that you read the script as you listen to the debate, as you play and listen to the debate. Read that script. Okay, page 9. So class connect write-up. Let's see. Page 9. Okay, from the speech, Martin Luther King's speech, what is your interpretation of this statement? Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. So that's part of a speech that Martin Luther King gave. So what you'll do is listen to this speech, and again you can go down here and look at the PDF of it. And when you look at the PDF of it, this is what that speech is all about. But there's something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads to the palace of justice. So of course, Martin Luther King wanted justice for African Americans back in the 60s. And then he says, in the process of gaining our rightful place, meaning are gaining the citizenship that we deserve as Americans, let's not be guilty of wrongful deeds, meaning let's not do the wrong thing. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst of freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. That's what I want you to interpret, that statement. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. So I think you can come up with what this statement means by reading all of these words. And remember, Martin Luther King always promoted peace, civil disobedience, meaning peaceful disobedience. Okay, so you look at that and answer that Class Connect write-up question from page 9. Okay, page 10. And let's look at the Class Connect write-up. Page 10. What is one reason the Founding Fathers gave us the right to assemble? So as you start thinking about social activism and protesting the government, assembly is a major thing. And you can see this, the picture here, the March on Washington. If you ever saw Forrest Gump, and it shows the scene where he goes walking across here and he sees his old girlfriend, and he's up there giving a kind of a speech, but they turn the sound down. Well, this was the march that he was at during that filming. Okay, in 1963, Martin Luther King, he called people to excuse me, people to protest racial segregation. And racial segregation means segregate is to separate, and that was where, of course, African American people were kept away from white people in many instances. Different drinking fountains, different restrooms, different restaurants, different schools, all of those things. And Martin Luther King and many other people, whites and African American, wanted that to stop because we were all Americans. So the civil disobedience, the gatherings to protest, is what came about of all that. And what happened, the way all this came about and why we were given that right, you can see down here the writers of the Constitution and the Declarers of Independence, they were protesters of the British government. So back before we got our freedom, before the Revolutionary War, we would protest, our founding fathers would protest against the British government whenever they had a chance. And of course, from those protests, as they protested the government, then the British government did not want them to do it, obviously. So as you can see right here, the right to peaceably assemble was guaranteed by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence because the British king had shut down all public meetings in Boston because of the fear of spreading anti-British sentiments, meaning that if people got together, they would go against the British government. So because the British government shut down a public assembly, Thomas Jefferson actually put public assembly into the Constitution. Pretty good thinking guy, wasn't he? So again, you can see down below here that the reason that he put assembly in is because the British government did not let the people in the United States assemble. So he wanted to make sure we had that right. Okay, moving on. So page 11. Let's go back to the Class Connect write-up and see what we might have from page 11. Okay, the videos. What were some of the social differences that seemed to foster the 60s and 70s conflicts? Were they economic, political, racial, or religious? So you'll go right in here. And these were, at one time people called hippies. And you ask your parents about hippies. If they're older, then they might have been hippies, or certainly your grandparents may have been hippies. But you can see here the military guys with the guns, and then the protesters here with flowers and such. What I want you to do is watch these two videos, and then they will tell you about the protests, civil rights protests of the 60s and the war protests against the Vietnam War in the 70s. Watch these videos, and then here are a bunch of questions, and these are supposed to be part of the discussion, but again, we're not doing the discussions in here. But you are answering this question. That's the Class Connect write-up question. So watch the videos and then answer that question as the Class Connect write-up question. Alright, page 12. We're just about finished, so hang in there. Page 12. See if there's Class Connect write-up here. Page 12. What happened to many of the civil rights protesters in the 60s? Let's take a look here. So now on page 12, now we're talking about civil disobedience. Again, that's being disobedient within society, or within where you live. And Early on, the colonists, they would parade through the streets. They'd be attacked by the tax collectors. They would dump loads of tea in the Boston Harbor. You heard about the Boston Tea Party, so that's civil disobedience. Of course, in our society, we're able to do that. And this talks about, you can look about all of this and how civil disobedience was really the thing that lots of people believed in a free society. And you can see here Henry David Thoreau, a great thinker in early years, said a government which imprisons unjustly, meaning puts people in jail for no reason, it's not fair, obviously. So it talks about that, and there are really some fanciful writing with just essentially what he's saying is that government that doesn't govern correctly is not going to have its power for when it wants it. The people will strike up against them. So civil disobedience became important, and you can see here it starts talking about Martin Luther King's nonviolent protest, meaning not, no weapons or guns or hammers or sticks or anything like that. But the protesters, they would do it peacefully. We can see over here, they would get tear gas and water cannons, meaning like fire hoses. They would shoot at people. You may be have seen pictures of those. We can see what happened. Even though they were peaceful, thousands of marchers and protesters subjected themselves to violent physical and verbal abuse and jail time while boycotting buses, filling segregated restaurants and stores, and packing jails to their fullest capacity. So these people were peaceful. So these African American protesters, they would go into the white restaurants and the white stores, or they would boycott buses, meaning they would not use the bus service. So they were doing all of these things, but they end up being attacked, physically attacked, verbally abused, and things like that, even though they were trying to be as peaceful as possible. So that's the answer to that class-connected write-up question, that they were subjected to lots of these, the physical abuse and such, and even subjected to arrest because of what they were doing. Then as you move down here, you can see in 2006 there were some riots across the country, and a lot of people call them riots, but where these people were assembling. 102 cities across the country. This was with U.S. immigration policy. So in Los Angeles they did it. 500,000 people in Los Angeles. 350,000 to 500,000 people in Dallas. Chicago, 300,000. So it was because they wanted Hispanics to have, they wanted the United States to come up with true immigration policy so that Hispanic people, citizens or not, were treated fairly, and generally were non-citizens because of the immigration policy, which means non-citizens. But you can see down here, legal and both illegal immigrants protested all of this. Okay, page 13, and let's see here. So we did page 12, what the civil rights protesters talked about that. 13. When the WTO protests in Seattle got out of hand, what did the police have to do? And then what does WTO stand for? Now this one right here, this one you'll probably have to go on, do a Google search to find out about what the World Trade Organization and find out what it does, because it's not exactly in the writing. But on this one, what did the Seattle protests, when they got out of hand, what did the police have to do? So let's look at this. So the World Trade Organization met in Seattle in 1999, and there were protesters there, thousands of protesters, and different groups came in, small groups, 500,000 people, to large groups. You can see down here, majority of the people were non-violent protesters, but a small group started some violence and looting, meaning going into the stores and stealing TVs and breaking things and stuff like that, that the police and the National Guard declared a state of emergency. The mayor even declared martial law. Martial law means you can't be out after dark. There are all kinds of limitations on what you can do and things like that. But here's what the police had to do. They had to issue curfews, meaning you couldn't stay out over a certain amount of time. Arrested people, they tear gas people, pepper spray, shoot rubber bullets at people. So there were violent protesters and non-violent, and they needed to break up all of these groups, so you can see how even civil disobedience that's non-violent can end up turning violent when, certainly when people get um, confronted by the police who are trying to keep peace. So this talks about the WTO and the issues there. This is an assignment. So the battle in Seattle. So what you're going to do in this assignment, you can see, you're going to create an informational project on the protests in Seattle in 1999. You can do video, slideshow presentation using PowerPoint, research paper, podcast, newspaper article, whatever it is. But you need to answer these questions. So if I'm doing a PowerPoint, then I would say that each of these questions would be a different slide in the PowerPoint. Or if I'm just writing this up in a word processor, research paper, each of these would be a definite paragraph so that I could tell what you're writing about. Don't just put it all in one paragraph, but make sure you address these so that the reader knows exactly what you are addressing. Then finally, you need to support your article, specific wording from the Constitution, court cases. You can use images, things like that. So I would encourage you to do a PowerPoint, a slideshow if you can. Make it much more interesting. Submit it to the Dropbox, and then you can click right down here to see how you're going to be graded on it. So here's how you're going to get graded. So we can go down here where you learn a little bit more. So you can see the different points for it. So use that rubric to guide you. So that's the assignment that you need to do for this unit. So make sure you do well on that. Then finally, when we go to page 14, 14 is going to be the social contract quiz. So that's the section C quiz. So that's the end of this. And as always, I have the quiz right over here under, where is it? Section C. America's social contract. Because I don't have that quiz posted, so I'll get that quiz posted over here. Actually, I don't see the quiz. I think I took that out. So you're not going to have to do that quiz because you have that assignment. So, okay, that's all for section C. And then I'll get section D. Recording is obviously going to be different, okay, or separate from this. So thanks for listening. Pay attention to everything I share in the Class Connect write-up. Get that turned in, and then do the Battle in Seattle assignment. Thank you, everybody. Bye.